Go live, so let's see if it works. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Inspected Goals with Luke and Sam. Me being Luke, obviously, I hope you realise, and it should have my name at the bottom there. Sam, how are we doing?
I'm all good, thank you. Yeah, it feels like we're getting ridiculously close now to the season starting with the Community Shield this weekend. I feel like that's like the official start of the season. Um, and then I'm going to watch some live Football League this weekend as well, going to watch Preston play Wigan. So it feels to me like the football season's probably starting. And it means only, what is it now, 8 days until the Premier League. So getting there and hopefully just on like the last few decisions with my draft. So all good, yeah. How about you?
Yeah, it's getting to become crunch time, isn't it? Guys, if you're in the chat, let us know about the sound levels, by the way. Last time we had some issues with that. Sam, you have recorded, haven't you, on the Skype for the podcast yet?
I
Good,
have, yep.
good man. So you're more organised than me. Yeah, it's nerve wracking. It's getting close, but it's still my favourite time of the season, really. To be honest, before it all kicks off. But I am getting anxious for it to actually start now. I think once the Community Shield is out of the way, it's really crunch time, isn't it? So. Yeah, looking forward to it. So what have we got planned on this episode for you? Basically, our plan is to run through the top 6 sides. Historically, I suppose you could debate some of that. But the top 6 sides and their players, we're just going to look through who we expect to start long term, discuss the options from them. Because along with our thinking for this pod and just general is that we think expected minutes is a bit of an edge really that we can gather and gain as we go through the season, sort of balancing that against the models. So a lot of this will be narrative theory. Obviously, until we start seeing the teams play, we'll get a better picture. But we've talked to some fans, we've done a little bit of research ourselves, and we've come up with these teams to sort of discuss, and we hope that there'll be some talking points that come out of it. I can see the chat talking and they seem to be able to hear us, so that's good as well.
I'd say as well, Luke, it's interesting because you see a lot of chat on like FPL Twitter about how important the preseason actually is. And I probably don't put as much value in it compared to most people in terms of the way players are playing necessarily, although there definitely is some value in that. For me, it's the minutes is a huge part of it in terms of any tactical changes and changes to the starting lineup, but also minutes in terms of players building up fitness and whether we think they're going to be ready to play the first game week if there's any question marks over them.
Yeah, indeed, and that's often a problem, isn't it? Because as we'll discuss when we go through these teams, it's like you've got where you think the team might end up, but right at the beginning of the season, everyone's at different levels, so it might not necessarily be the team you expect from game week 1, and then obviously things can actually change. Players can perform in roles that unexpectedly, and suddenly the whole picture changes. But let's get straight into it because we've got quite a lot to talk about. I'm going to bring up the first 2 teams here, which hopefully you guys can see, which is Man City and Man United. These are 2 teams that I've been designated to talk about because I'm supposed to be a Man United fan, even though that's incredibly loose these days. And obviously I follow...
Don't blame me, mate, the last few seasons.
Yeah, exactly. The glory supporter is just gone. So I'm going to talk through these 2 teams. Now, I'm going to explain them a little bit for the pod first of all. We're going to start with Manchester United. And again, this is just my thoughts really, and also I've spoke to late riser Pranell. A lot of the people watching this will know him. He's a big Man United fan. He spent a lot of time watching them in pre-season, and he's helped me here as well to come up with this team. I've kind of put the teams as if they're going to be in favourable fixtures, right? I don't think there's any point us putting the teams, when they're going to be playing a low block versus Man City or whatever. Because we're not going to want to own the players at that point anyway. So this is kind of like perfect world scenario. So for Manchester United, I'll just read through the 11 for the pods. I know the Martinez is wrong, Jack Walker. We just used his name because the lineup up doesn't have everyone particularly, so we've just used him. David De Gea's in goal. We've got Dalot at right back. We've got Maguire and Martinez at centre back. Luke Shaw at left back. We've got Fred in midfield. We've got Ericsson and Bruno Fernandes that I'm told play as almost attacking 8s. And we've got Sancho right wing, Martial up top, and Rashford left wing. Now, again, this isn't necessarily for game week 1, but I think with Man United, that team will be fairly close. What I'm told from the way they play is that they play quite a high line under the new manager, and they'll be pushed quite high up the pitch. Now, obviously, Martinez has only just come in, so it's debatable whether he'll be ready for game week 1. but he's more of a passing centre-back. Maguire in a high line, Luke Shaw, Dalot, and then Fred as a DM worries me, I'll be honest, in terms of keeping clean sheets. That was never really their thing anyway last season. I would say that because they're expected to be so high up the pitch and more of a ball dominant team, or trying to be, there will be games, I think, where they will keep the clean sheets as a result of that. So it might be one of those things where they look like they're quite good in some games and they look quite solid, and then they'll just easily be broken by certain teams that counter on them. I certainly think that from the defensive line, for me, there isn't really any options. I understand that Dalot is relatively popular because he's very cheap and he's a fairly attacking right back. His non-penalty XG numbers are terrible when I looked, but I've seen him play. He puts in a lot of crosses. Actually went to the home to Brentford game. He was putting in a lot of crosses. If I remember rightly, it's like 0.05 or something ridiculous. In fact, I'm just going to have a quick look to remind myself. 0.08 per 90 non-penalty XG XA last season for Dalot. So not exactly what you'd want. I do think that Fred at DM is a big problem. I don't think that's his best role. It's a age-old problem for Manchester United. They just haven't had a decent DM for a long time. As a result, I personally think that McTominay or Van der Beek is probably likely to sit in there with Fred, or at least Eriksen hasn't played any minutes in pre-season so far at all, to my knowledge. I haven't seen him on the fantasy football. If you've got a membership to Fantasy Football Scout, by the way, they've got like a complete tracker of all the minutes that people have played in pre-season. Eriksen doesn't appear on there, so I haven't watched them personally, but he's not on there. So whether he'll be ready for game week 1 is debatable. I think against most teams they might play Van der Beek or McTominay in there, but Eriksen's obviously a very good player, and like Late Riser was saying, it's expected that he probably will play in some of the home sort of favourable games. So that midfield worries me a bit. Fred, Eriksen and Bruno Fernandes, I'm not sure they've got the best legs or defensive capability between them. I don't know what you think about that in terms of just the defensive setup for Man United, but
same as you, mate. It worries me.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't worry me personally because I'm not a Man United fan, but looking at it like that, I think that's a concern. I think if they don't get De Jong, it's like another season where they're just not signing that player in that position that's absolutely key. Which, I know that's easier said than done because there's only so many players around who can play to that ability in that position as like a ball winner and a defensive midfielder. So it's about getting the right player. But yeah, having Dalot starting at right back, I think I'd be concerned about if I was a United fan. So from an FPL point of view, even though we know Shaw didn't have a great season last season, despite that, we know he is very attacking. There's a reason why he was like something like the second or third highest owned player at the beginning of last season. But I think they're so were last season and potentially will be so poor defensively again. I think it's unlikely that he'll be highly owned throughout the season. But who knows? That can all change. But all we need to know is for now,
Yeah.
I don't think any of those defenders are an option personally. But I have seen Dalot in quite a few teams, I guess, because of his price.
Yeah. I mean, in past seasons, if Dalot was 4.5, you'd probably think, you bite your hand off. But I think relative to other options, it doesn't particularly entice me. I can understand why you might go there, though. I think one of the fullbacks is likely to tuck in, and it makes more sense for Dalot to be the attacking one and Shaw to tuck in. I also think Malaysia, it's not even 100% sure that Shaw will play, because they've signed this Malaysia guy, and apparently he's quite quick. So I think he would aid with their high line. So that's a debate. In terms of their pre-season minutes, there's no real clear picture there. They've all kind of played fairly even on that front. In fact, Malaysia is just slightly above Shaw, I think, in total. So that one's up for debate for sure. I don't think there's any options there, basically, in defence or midfield outside Dalot, personally. That's the headline for me. I think that they'll be, because of this high line, they will be exposed. I do think it may result in them dominating some teams and scoring some goals. Pranell doesn't seem to think that Bruno Fernandes will be much of an option, feels he'll be playing slightly deeper. So that's come from him, and, I think given his price, it makes sense to stay away from him to begin with, even though there's obviously a chance he gets penalties back now, considering Ronaldo might not be playing, right, because he's the fly in the ointment we haven't even spoke about yet.
Yeah, I guess we'll get onto that when you move to the attackers. But this was the headline there, is that today he's like returned to Manchester, hasn't he, for training, but he said to the club that they want to release him from his contract. So you'd assume that would mean he has something lined up, but like not necessarily. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like anyone wants him to play for them for, I guess, financial reasons and for what that does to a team tactically. So it's definitely an interesting one. And I don't think there's any guarantee he leaves at all, is there? It's very, very up in the air.
This is it. This is the worry. At the end of the day, if he can't go anywhere and he refuses to play, then that's something that could happen, I suppose. You know, we often see these things and then they talk it round. Who knows? We'd be totally guessing there as to what goes on. So for the moment, I've kind of left him out. For the front three, with Rashford, Martial and Sancho, my personal preference here is for Sancho. I think that he's, out of all of them, his minutes are just the most secure. We don't really have anyone else who can play the right wing. Like Rashford can go over there, it doesn't really work. We know that his numbers from the Bundesliga were very good. We know that last season wasn't particularly good for him. But I think just on an expected minutes, he is the best option. He's obviously more creative than he scores generally. I was looking on review, and let's see if I can flick over to that quickly. And if we sort by the top 50 midfielders in the game according to review over 6 game weeks, so that's the horizon, and I've sorted it by total points. So these should be expected to get the most points of the top of midfielders. Obviously got Salah right at the top. Sancho and Bruno Fernandes do feature. Sancho is sort of 15th, 16th, 17th, something like that. So he is in there. Points per million, suffers a little bit because he's a little bit more expensive. I don't think he is the worst ever option, but I don't think you need to go there straight from the beginning. And as a result, I think people have gone for Rashford and Martial just simply because they're a little bit cheaper.
The Rashford price is mad, isn't it? Not in the sense I'm saying he's going to be incredible value, but for a player to drop that much in price over one season is huge. Like I do think he's underpriced. Even though he didn't have the best season last year, but in like seasons gone by, I think it was a season before last, like he scored plenty of goals. Did he score 15 plus in one of those seasons?
He did.
50, I can't remember how the exact total, but over 15 goals.
I think it was like 17 or something. He did have penalties in there as well, though. But yeah.
Okay, so we know he's a quality footballer, but it's just this interesting thing that we say that about so many of these Man United players, and they all happen to play in the same teams. There's obviously a common denominator there, which is the club. And whether that was a manager or whether it's the infrastructure of the club or recruitment, if whatever that thing is changes, that potentially changes the whole team and brings the best out of the players. So if the root cause of that changes, whether it's Ronaldo, whether it's a manager, whatever you think, suddenly there are potentially loads of underpriced assets. So that definitely makes it interesting. And I agree with you in terms of Sancho, just in terms of purely his ability. I think he's such a good player. And I felt really frustrated last season. Seeing him play but not being able to play to his strengths almost tactically, and him just not quite getting there because his dribbling is absolutely brilliant, but world class. And to think, in the right system with the right players around him, which it may be this season, he becomes a real option.
Yeah, and he wouldn't be the first person to take a while to adapt, right? We see that quite regularly.
No, of course not, because he obviously played in England before, but only at under 23 level. I don't think he even made. In fact, I'm sure he would have made appearances for Man City beforehand, but maybe like in the League Cup.
Yeah.
So it's not even like he's come from England, gone away, and come back. Playing in England prior to that, he was only. Well, I think he was the same age group, or as Foden, wasn't he? They were in a very similar position.
I think that's irrelevant anyway. I think just moving in general to a new club doesn't even matter if it's necessarily abroad or different leagues can result in adapting to a new system, new managers. Anyway, I think I just want to put a little bit of a negative spin on Rashford personally. I understand the price and the fact that he's almost certain to start the season. My slight worry with him is, first of all, he hasn't performed very well for a long time. I think that's pretty much a fact if anyone's watched him. It's not been great. So we are kind of relying on him to up his game. Everything in pre-season seems to suggest that he can do that. My other worry with him is the fact that Martial is playing well and he's back. We know Martial can play on the left wing, so if Ronaldo does come back, does that then leave Rashford maybe fighting with Martial for that left spot? Maybe. I think you've got Elanga, who did okay last season. Like, he's another option in that position. Like, that's
did well last season, I'd say, for his age.
Yeah, he's another option in that role. I also think, given Eriksen used to play on that side and given his age, I'm not entirely convinced he would be running in this double eight system in a lot of the games with Bruno Fernandes. I repeat again, he's not played a minute in pre-season as far as I know, so it might be a way off, and we're only sort of looking at the first few weeks probably. But I think if there was ever going to be a player that would maybe drift over to the left side, he's another option that could do that in some games. Maybe you want a bit more control on that side rather than the more counter pace of Rashford. All these players just end up going to the left side, right? So I think that's representative in the price a little bit as well, really. Whether they meant that FPL Towers is another question, but I think his minutes are slightly more at risk than others. I'm told by Prano he's nailed, and I do think he is nailed to begin the season. I just worry moving a little bit further forward, but we've always got the wild card and stuff to fix that, and their first two games aren't the worst in the world, so
yeah.
I don't really have much else to say for Man United. Obviously the Ronaldo thing, like I say, he could come in and change a lot of it, but we know that the manager has used a similar striker in the past, so I don't think it would necessarily break everything. But for me it's Sancho from the attacking line if you really want to go there. Martial for now is short term, Rashford are more short term, and I can see the appeal. And then Dalot maybe as a backup. I don't think there's any other options, but they're not really for me to start the season. I do expect them to score quite a few goals though in this system. Happy with that?
Yeah, happy with that, Luke. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. The only thing I would say is, like, if Ronaldo does start playing, I think he'll be a similar asset to last season, in that it's unlikely you'll ever own him long term. But he might be the kind of player that you own on a free hit, for example, if they happen to have a really good fixture. Or you might own... I think that's probably the main time you'd own him, or like just before a wild card, if it's just for a couple of fixtures, because I think he'll still score goals. And that was the thing last season. People are very black and white about it, and there seems to be people that like either think Ronaldo had this incredible season and therefore he needs to stay at Man United because he makes them better because of his last minute winners, and there's other people who think, oh, despite all those goals, he actually had a really, really bad impact on the team. I think that's true, but also he played well. It's a bad fit. That's the key thing. Ronaldo did what Ronaldo always does, just scored lots of goals, but it just didn't fit within the team, and I don't think it would this season either. But absolutely fascinated to see what happens if he stays, like whether Ten Hag would actually start to rotate him more or bench him.
Yeah,
be really interesting. But yeah, happy to move on to City. I'll let you take the stage here, because this is what people have joined for, a lot of people anyway, and I'll be making notes myself.
Yeah, probably. I could talk about Man City all day, and I don't want to do that if I can help it, but invariably I'm going to have to sort of talk a little bit about it. I also don't want to bang too much on about the tactics, because people are here to talk about FPL and talk about the FPL options, but again, part of that is the tactics, and that has to come up a little bit. But it is what it is there. For the purposes of the pod, on the screen, I've got Ederson in goal, Kyle Walker at right back. I've got Diaz and Ake at centre back, Cancelo at left back. I've got Rodri and Bernardo Silva in midfield, with De Bruyne also in midfield, slightly pushed up this season, I think. Almost a hybrid position for him. We've got Riyad Mahrez on the right wing, Grealish on the left wing, and Haaland as centre forward. Now, with this lineup, this is who I think will probably start the Charity Shield, based on the information we have right now. With Man City, I don't pretend to ever try and pick, even when I was doing it all last season, a team for the whole season. I literally try to do the next week, which is why I can do it with some relative success. If you ask me to pick the team in 5 weeks, I think that's close to impossible for some of the positions. I will say that with Man City this season, it's always tough. It's extra tough in the sense that the squad has changed quite a bit. We've had some quite significant comings and goings. We all know who those are, so I don't have to list them. The pre-season, they've literally played 2 games. I think we were talking on the very first pod about some teams and how they go abroad, and is it the best preparation for the players? Some of these guys have barely featured at all. We've got injury in the sense of Laporte. We've also got Stones, Gundogan and Foden, who have visa issues as a result of the vaccine. So that's negatively affected it, and makes it harder to pick the team. I will start for the reasons why I've picked these guys, though, for the Charity Shield. So Ederson in goal, I don't think really needs explaining. I will say that I think he is a very good option, just simply because his price has come down. We did cover goalkeepers on a previous pod, especially if you're wild carding early. The fixtures are very good. He's secure. It makes sense to me. I think he's a very viable option indeed. With the centre halves, we've got Ake and Diaz to start the season. Now, I think at the moment that's more to do with the fact that Stones, we don't know what's going on with him because he's not been with the group. So he's been with the under-23s. He also had a slight injury at the back end of last season. So I don't think he'll start, but he's obviously a factor. He's been immaculate whenever he's played for Man City. Diaz is in there. He's also being managed as a result of an injury, but he did play the last game versus Bayern. So I think he starts and he is probably first choice. So I do like Diaz as a pick overall. I just think that Stones is coming a little bit closer to him. So it's maybe a slight worry there. I don't think his minutes are as secure. We did see this last season where Diaz did drop in the odd game, which surprised people because the previous season he was like an ever-present. But he did drop on occasion in certain games. Ake, I can't see how he doesn't start. The guy's just been a revelation really in the last 6 months. I don't know if people realise, but he's come on leaps and bounds. He's been really, really good. It's more to do with the fact that Laporte is injured and Ake's left-footed, and obviously the Stones thing I just mentioned. He's also had, in the limited pre-season we've had, a lot of the minutes. So I would expect Ake will start the season. Whether he's
What's his price, Luke? Ake?
He's 5 million. So
is it? It's just really interesting, isn't it? Because I've not seen him in any drafts. Yeah, you mentioned that. I wonder if that'll change now.
Yeah.
Like I've currently got Diaz in my team personally, but that makes me really question that, particularly around those minutes. I hadn't realised until you said that just how much of an impact Ake had over the last 6 months. And yeah, obviously combine that with Stones and Laporte not being ready potentially.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think he is potentially viable to start the season with, and with Pep. Generally, his whole thing is he wants to reward players. He keeps everyone happy in this squad, and I think it's sort of goes unnoticed that he's got this world-class squad. And I know people moan he's got so much money and all this stuff, but they don't generally come out and moan that often, the Man City players, even when they're not playing, and he keeps them generally quite happy. I know at the end of the season he says if you want to go, you go, like Sterling and stuff, but you don't really see it during the season. And part of that is because he sort of, at the end of the day, if you do well in training and you play well when I play you, then you're going to get your chances. Now, Ake's, of anyone in the squad, has probably taken that chance more than anyone. I'm not going to kid you and say that, if Laporte was fit, that he wouldn't come straight in for Ake. But the longer that injury goes on, and depending on how Ake performs, there is a chance he could stay in longer than people realise. He also can play left back and play it pretty damn well as well. And considering they have a general shortage in that area now with only 2 recognised fullbacks, both of which are really right backs. Cancelo is really a right back. He's sort of reformed himself as a left back last season. He obviously plays that very well. Zinchenko leaving, who was a left midfielder, and then we all know what happened to Mendy. They don't even have one in the squad. This is why I'm absolutely certain they will sign a left back. There's news today of Grimaldo from Benfica coming in rather than Cucurella. I know he's good on Football Manager. I don't know him in real life. He was in one of the old Football Managers anyway, and he's left-footed.
Must be good.
Yeah. I think they desperately need one because Cancelo, they've just got 2 people to play that position essentially. I do think Stones and Ake can cover at the fullback positions. We have seen this last season, so if people need to, sort of fact check that, they can see that Stones was played at right back. I think it was against Brentford. I think the idea there was that Tony was expected to play and he drifts off to that left-hand side. Tony didn't play in the end. It was a doubt. He was like a slight doubt for the game, expected to play. Stones played at right back as a result when most people thought Walker would. Now, Walker also had his issues, right? He had issues with injury. He had that red card that Pep was extremely angry about. His friend also died as well. So you could debate, was it for other reasons? But I think he used him there to sort of sit on Tony. Tony didn't end up playing.
Am I right in saying Laporte's played at fullback as well before?
Laporte has played at fullback as well.
Yeah, I thought he had.
Yeah, he's used Ake at left back. I mean, against Burnley, for example. Basically, the big bruiser teams, he likes to have that third centre back there if he can. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that on occasion. Out of all the teams, of all of City's opening games, I think West Ham probably fit that mould the most, where they're a bit of a bruiser team on the old set pieces, so having some extra height helps. And then also Bowen being on the right wing is obviously a massive threat. So I think Cancelo versus him, is that the best idea? I think if you put Ake there, he'd probably have a better result. So that's
Captain Ake, that's it. Done, mate.
So that's a possibility. The thing is, until they sign a left back, they don't really have many options. That is the end of the day. Cancelo and Walker at fullback look the most likely. I don't know if it strikes you as it does me, but when you look at that team, it's incredibly narrow, isn't it? You've basically got Cancelo cutting in, you've got Grealish probably cutting in there, and you've got Mahrez cutting in. The width basically comes from Walker being right foot right, and that is a bit of a train wreck because we know he's not good offensively. This is why... Sorry, Karen.
So I was going to say, I wonder if going forward, is that where the kind of role De Bruyne has comes into it more? Because you often see De Bruyne drift into those wide positions, don't you? So does that therefore happen more on the left-hand side as Cancelo comes inside, for example?
Yeah, so De Bruyne he's been close to Haaland, but he might have to drift out to the right to help out with the right foot a little bit. Yes, he's always kind of done that. I think ideally, if he's going to play this sort of setup, he would like that left-footed left-back, and he would like Cancelo in the role where Walker is, because it would be better. He may not be able to do that unless, of course, against West Ham he plays Ake left back and then puts Cancelo there. This is why, moving on to Walker, I don't think he's necessarily an option, really. It's a very appealing price, and I do think he will, until they sign a left back, and let's not forget that there's 4 weeks, I think it is, into the season where the transfer window goes. He's got a good chance to play the majority of the games, quite similar to Ake, but after that I would worry. I think he only started around 20-something games last season. Again, there were other reasons for that. But I don't think it's ideal when you're trying to get balls in the box and your wingers are predominantly inverted. He doesn't really have any outside options anymore after selling Sterling. So I'm not really going to talk too much about Rodri, Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne. I think they're fairly much a lock in those positions that they are. Bernardo Silva can occasionally go to the front three, we know this. He has got Phillips there now, so he could potentially play Phillips and Rodri if he wants to make it more secure in some games. That is an option to him. De Bruyne basically is, as we all know, is the pick if you just want nailed minutes, really. I think De Bruyne, although he overperforms quite a lot, and I have to be, as much as he's a fantastic player, I always have to be pushed or encouraged to actually pick him in fantasy. I do think that he could do even better this season, just simply because his role might be slightly changed. If they're a little bit more secure at the back, i.e. when Phillips comes in now and then, if they do sign that left back to have more of a balance, then I think that he could be better as he's pushed up closer. Obviously, just the fact of having Haaland there, people say that having a striker would help him in general, which does make sense, right? I mean, if you're finding someone who's really, really good. Why is my audio chalked? People are saying my audio's chalked. Damn it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Luke, yeah. It says robotic. Robotic sounds.
That's not good. Let me try and sort that somehow.
Yeah, while you sort that, I guess people are waiting for you to chat about Foden, I think.
Are they really? Am I taking too long?
Yeah, well, I can talk about that for a bit if you want, because you touched on it at the beginning, just while you try and sort that out, because I guess you're going to move on to it anyway. I think the interesting thing with Foden, with regards to him not training with the first team during pre-season, which Luke kind of touched on there, is that even if he's played with the 23s, and even if he's played like internal friendlies that aren't reported on, well, that's just miles off the level of Premier League football, or the likely opposition as well within Premier League pre-season friendlies. So even if he's got minutes within the under-23s, which I don't even know if he does, he could well not be ready for that first game. Like, I wouldn't be surprised personally, but I'd be interested to see if that's also your rationale as well, Luke.
I'll be lying if I said I was listening because I was trying to sort the mic out.
That's right, no worries. It says it sounds echoey apparently. Is that the same? I think it might just be yours. I don't know. Maybe people will tell me if it's my mic as well.
I said that's better. I unplugged it.
There we go. Lovely stuff.
Okay, well, I'll carry on from where I was. Yeah, you filled in well done, mate. And I don't know what you said, but I'm sure it was great.
Basically just touched on Foden and the fact that under 23 minutes aren't as nearly as intense as Premier League minutes. So even if he has played minutes for them in behind closed doors friendlies, which we don't know if he has, there's probably questions there over his match fitness.
Okay, yeah, no, it makes sense. Moving to the front three, just on this for the Charity Shield anyway. Like I said, all these players kind of cut in. I think the whole expectation around Grealish is fairly obvious in terms of he's had the most minutes of the front three in pre-season so far. He looks like he's come back pretty damn fit, and he's obviously 7 million, which is very cheap for a front three attacker. There's the whole players for Man City generally take around a year to settle in. We've seen it numerous times. I mean, Cancelo himself was one of them. Rodri's another one. Bernardo wasn't particularly fantastic to begin with. Mahrez, the same thing. We could argue that's never really got there, but it has been a thing for a lot of the Man City players. So the expectations there. Also, he was very good last season. We have talked about this before. It's just that he had some bad variance. I mean, you only have to watch the games to see his numbers were good. He's obviously an elite player in terms of ball carrying and everything. There were so many times when the ball just was off the line, just near miss, hit the post. He was very, very unlucky. So I see the appeal there. The worry really with Grealish is the fact that I don't doubt for a second, like you said with Foden, that when Foden is available, that Foden comes into this team and plays the majority of games like he did last season. So if Foden comes into this team and Haaland's secure as the centre forward, because obviously Foden played there, where does he feature? Now, he usually features on the left wing. There is talk amongst the fans that he could be used on the right. Apparently he's mentioned he would like to play there. I haven't actually seen this quote. And it's not like he hasn't played there ever, but it's like a very, very small percentage of his minutes. I think from memory he came on, he was surprisingly benched versus Atletico in either the quarters or the semis or whatever as the Champions League. He came on, changed the game instantly from right wing, played a lovely ball, set up a goal, was great. Personally, I think combine that with the fact that Mahrez usually doesn't last long in Pep's team in the Premier League, just because his pressing's not quite up to it. Then I like to think that maybe Foden will come in for Mahrez. But until we actually see that happen, it is a bit of a leap of faith. The more obvious solution right now, when they don't have a left back, would be that he plays on the left wing there, because then he would have that width to put balls into the box for Haaland, and Cancelo would operate as an inverted fullback. That does make more sense. However, I cannot see Grealish not starting the season given how well he started and the fact that he's played the majority of minutes. So it's like a catch-22 situation. I think Foden will be on the bench to begin with, but I think he will work his way in. And we have to kind of hope, if you're going for Grealish, that is for Mahrez, I think. It is a leap of faith at the end of the day. Moving forward, I do still think that Foden is the best option. If you want an attacking midfielder from them outside De Bruyne, and if you're looking to spend the money, obviously it's him. Otherwise, I think Foden... his non-penalty expected involvement per 90 was actually above De Bruyne again. I really, really like him. So yeah, it is more of a leap of faith for Grealish at this moment in time. How do you feel about it? Because I've had him in my drafts in now, and I've seen him for a few people. Are you willing to take the plunge on Grealish? Because I think it is appealing for the first few weeks, given their fixtures and the fact that you think he's probably going to play.
He's not currently in my draft, but yeah, I'm definitely tempted by it. And he would be the one I'd go for, not just because of what you've said there, but from a budget point of view as well. He's that little bit cheaper. And yeah, everything you've said there about him being unlucky last season, particularly in terms of expected assists, like in the Premier League, I think his assists were about half of his expected assists. Maybe it was like 3 and 6 or something like that. But that was even higher if you looked within competitions outside of the Premier League as well. And it's not like expected goals where you can then put that down to, well, maybe he was finishing poorly or he's a poor finisher. That's bad luck. It's a goalkeeper, or it's the player he passes the ball to making the mistake. So I think we can definitely expect him to have a good season. Pep likes a dribbler on the wing. He likes someone who draws players, and it's not necessarily that they then take a player on and cross the ball every time. It's that they draw players towards them, win a free kick, or they then play the ball out and it creates spaces. So I think that's why, one of the main reasons Pep likes Grealish, personally, based on previous teams he's managed as well. But also he just creates chances, doesn't he? So I think he's a very good pick. Not currently in my draft, but I'll be, I think, rethinking Diaz based on what you've said about the defence as well.
Yeah, I don't want to put people off too much there. I think Diaz is all right to begin with, and he could just stay in. He could just stay in. It's just the fact that Stones is not too far away, and Diaz is being managed. Pep has said that he is being managed after that injury slightly, and he's only played, I think, a half so far. I was going to check that.
And also, he like something I've noticed that Pep does is that he sometimes gets a centre back pairing. Maybe one of the defenders is out injured, so he sticks with two. If they do well, he just keeps playing them. So there's been periods I don't know if it's last season or the season before, but there's just been like Laporte and Stones for quite a few games in a row. And then one of them will drop out and Diaz comes in, for example, and it goes well, and then they keep them for a few games in a row. So
yeah,
like if that goes well in the first game of the season, like I don't know, would you be surprised if that is the lineup for the Community Shield in the first couple of games? Would you be surprised if that goes well to just see that be the common centre back pairing?
No, not at all. Exactly what I said. If they're performing well, then there's nothing to say they won't stay in. Like I say, I'll repeat that I think Diaz and Laporte is the preferred one, but there's nothing to say that can't change. And it's happened. If you only have to go back and look at Man City's centre back pairings over a number of seasons now, how even the very main men like Laporte can suddenly disappear and then come back, and anything. It does happen quite regularly. So that's why I like Cancelo. I mean, at the end of the day, he plays. I think you're paying that extra money for the security as well, which wasn't always the case for him. He plays on both full-back positions and he plays inside and outside. So he just gives Pep every tactical option available for every game, and that's what Pep's all about, right? So I think he is worth paying the extra for personally. I haven't even touched on some of the others. Like Alvarez is probably I think Alvarez is the only player in the team who can play on the right side and is right-footed. Now this whole inside-outside thing, obviously the players can. Like Grealish, for example, the goal that he set up for Haaland, he's playing on the left, he is right-footed, but he cut the ball back with his left foot for Haaland and he scored. It's not like these players are terrible and can't use their opposite foot. So he may have to, again, make do with what he's got in that sort of situation. But it's just that the instinct is always to cut in for those players, right? And he would prefer that inside-outside. So I think signing that left-back is imperative. I think that... the fact that everyone in his front line, apart from Alvarez, even Palmer, is left-footed is a bit of a problem, especially when Kyle Walker is your right back. Now, it may take a little while for them to sort themselves out, and like I said, the pre-season's not been great for Man City or anything, but ultimately this is Man City, so even if you sort of take 10% off of them, 15% off of them, is it going to make a massive difference? It remains to be seen. But if you cast your mind back to last season, they weren't great in the Community Shield. Game week 1 against Spurs, they weren't great either. So it might take them a couple of games to get up to speed, but is that enough?
you might not know this from memory, Luke, but generally the last friendly a team plays is against a tougher opposition, or often their last friendly against a tougher opposition will be the starting 11 that starts the first game of the season. Can you, from memory, can you remember how similar the team was last season in the Community Shield to then the game week 1 team a week later?
I can't remember offhand, but I think it was pretty close.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same.
Yeah. And again, on that note, I mean, Grealish signed and people didn't expect him to go straight in, and he just started straight from the beginning. Part of that was necessity. So just to touch on Alvarez again slightly, again, I know I can go on forever about this, but he's obviously raw. He's come from the Brazilian league. We don't know how good he is here. It might surprise people to hear that he is actually older than Haaland, slightly. Let's not forget that Jesus came from Brazil and came straight into the team and replaced Aguero from day one. So what I'm trying to get out there is, if Alvarez is showing everything right in training, and there's been good, Pep's been bigging him up as well. He's played some minutes already. He's played in both games, 70 minutes in the first preseason, 40 in the next. If he needs to use Alvarez because he's right-footed right wing, for example, or even the last 20 minutes fun, then he will do that. He'll do that if he needs to. So if he's ready, I wouldn't be totally shocked if he just suddenly starts playing. Like, it can happen. And this is the overriding message for me, is like, I love Man City options. I think you can take a chance on Grealish to begin with. I think that Foden will become it, but you just have to be prepared for anything. We all know this. And there's nothing to say that once he changes it, he doesn't like what he gets and then he leaves it that way for a while. But we're all guessing here at the end of the day. We are guessing because there's so much has changed. That's why, for me, the options are Cancelo, Kevin De Bruyne, Grealish and Foden, if you're willing to gamble a little bit, and obviously Haaland. We've already talked about Ederson and Diaz, who I also think are pretty good options. But that's not groundbreaking for anyone, I don't think. People are probably logging and say, like, who's definitely going to play? We're never going to know that. I'm not going to sit here and say for sure about any of this stuff, but I will say that, like I've already repeated, I think Grealish is a good punt, and Foden will probably become the guy that you want eventually. But Yeah, is there anything else I haven't covered about City? I'm conscious I've sort of gone on and on about them.
No, mate, well, it's all good. I would just say, like, lastly on Haaland, um, there's been like some comments from Pep. Well, there's been two things that like came out a few days ago that people like panicked about. One was, I think, is fair. Pep talked about the fact that it will take Haaland time. Now, whether that means suddenly that Haaland will not start certain games at the beginning of the season, I don't know, or whether it just means that he'll play less minutes. I'm not sure, but I feel like we kind of knew that was the case anyway. Another thing is that there's a quote from the Athletic. I think Sam Lee is the name of the Man City Athletic correspondent, about the fact that one of the reasons that Haaland joined City was because he wouldn't be expected to play necessarily all the big games. Like he would do it, for example, Real Madrid, they would just play him in every big game. Whereas at City, he's way more likely to get the chance to be rested if needed in smaller games, etc. So that's definitely worth bearing in mind. But we've known that since he signed. That's one of the main reasons that he joined. And then I would say as well on Haaland, if you're like one of those people now that's going out and out of your team and just keep switching between Kane and Haaland, just wait for the Community Shield. I think if Haaland plays the majority of that match, you can be pretty safe. You can be happy starting with him, like for sure. Whereas if Haaland plays, let's say Haaland just plays a half, then I'd be nervous and I'd probably be starting with Kane.
Yeah. If I had to punt, I think he's going to get 60 to 70 minutes, probably around 60. I think that's what most people expect. That's what
would that be enough for you to then start him in your team?
For me, yeah. But again, it's down to every individual, isn't it? Kane is certainly a very, very good pick as well. So
yeah, it's quality.
Absolutely. Someone said in the chat there, how does it look without Haaland? Well, obviously Alvarez is there. Depends quite how ready he is. I know I just bigged him up, but we're not sure. But otherwise it will be Foden. And that's the beauty of Foden that I didn't really mention, is he can obviously play all three of those positions. So I think Foden needs to play the last 20 minutes up front in the false nine, then he will do.
Ake will play there, I've heard.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he scores goals, Ake, occasionally. We've seen it.
Yeah, hey, get him in.
He does the job. I'll tell you what, I'm going to switch it round, so I just to give myself a rest, because I've been chatting non-stop. So we're going to switch to Spurs and Arsenal here, which I'm going to bring up now on the screen. And you can talk through, if you're happy to, Arsenal before I go back to Spurs, and then we'll do it the other way. So, yeah, Arsenal and Spurs are up on the screen for you, mate.
Yeah, sure. I'm just waiting let me just quickly get it up so I can see it. So in terms of Arsenal, again, similarly, this is a team I put together that's more based on generally what I think the strongest team is. So I realised that some of these players aren't fit potentially to play game week 1. So for those listening, that's Ramsdale in goal. The back four is Tomiyasu, Ben White, Gabriel and Zinchenko, Xhaka and Partey in a 2 in midfield, and then Martinelli left wing, Saka right wing, and Ødegaard behind Jesus. So this is based on chatting to a friend who supports Arsenal, and then based just a lot on kind of what we already know based on last season as well. And there's just a few things I wanted to touch on again that I think are interesting. In terms of working from the back forwards, in terms of Ramsdale, I've actually seen him creep into more people's teams. This is just based on what I've seen on Twitter, and I can see the obvious reason for that is the fixtures. But what I would say about Ramsdale is if you actually look at Ramsdale's underlying data, and that's post-shot XG conceded. So that's a measure that takes into account the quality of the shot faced, so the speed and direction of the ball towards the goal. He's one of the worst in the Premier League, and actually one of the worst in the top 5 leagues in Europe. So I don't think he had as good a last season as a lot of people think he did as a goalkeeper. Although there was a period where he was brilliant, and particularly brilliant for FPL, wasn't there? So I wouldn't be that confident starting with Ramsdale, although his minutes are certainly secure. Don't think that's anyone's concern. So that's just my opinion on that. I would be looking for, particularly because he's 5, isn't he? I think Ramsdale.
Ramsdale's 5, yeah. I've looked at it myself, just to potentially cover it as well. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason I would probably avoid him personally. And also I think with goalkeepers, I touched on this last week, I don't think save points is a good reason to buy a goalkeeper personally, because I think they're so unpredictable. Because you're essentially then buying a goalkeeper that plays for a team that concedes a lot of shots and is more likely to concede goals. I think that you've got to go with the fundamental of clean sheets first, because who that keeper will be, who, whenever they get a clean sheet, gets a load of bonus and save points, is actually really unpredictable season on season, I found. So 2 seasons ago it was Martinez. We didn't see that last season. This last season just gone, it went through phases of, at one point it was De Gea even for a few games, at one point it was Ramsdale that everyone owned and was like hauling for a few games, etc. So that's the reason I wouldn't go with him. Moving on to the back four, I said the thing to mention here is for game week 1, if you think about it, there's Saliba, who's pretty likely to start game week 1 based on
Yeah.
that's mainly based on like opinions of Arsenal fans I've read on Twitter, and that's due to injuries to the injury to Tomiyasu, which means it's likely that Ben White plays right back, and then Saliba fills in at right centre back. So that's worth bearing in mind. And the other reason for that is, I guess, that Tierney, in theory, could maybe switch and play on the other side, which I think he might do sometimes for Scotland when Robertson plays left back. But he's not fully fit at the moment, so it's likely we see Ben White at right back. And it's really funny, I think, because when the FPL released the prices, they released Arsenal first, and Ben White was 4.5, and like FPL Twitter was like in uproar, like, oh, they've made the game so easy. Like a top 6 defender for 4.5, he's going to play every week. And then you fast forward a month later, and he's literally in no teams. It's just like the most FPL Twitter thing ever. And that's partly to do with the rest of the other cheap prices. In terms of those guys, in terms of minutes, like I think Gabriel's certainly like the first choice centre back, and the strongest centre back within the team, and a really, really brilliant player, and actually has some goal threat as well. So I think that 5.0 price is certainly fair above Ben White. And also it's worth bearing in mind that Saliba was on loan last season at Marseille and actually had a really, really good season. There's been rumours, I don't know how true they are, that Marseille have been trying to re-sign him as well. He played almost every game for them in the league. And so because he had such a good season, if he then fills in at centre-back and does a really good job, who's to say that Ben White gets back in? Now, he probably will. Again, from seeing the opinions of Arsenal fans and from watching last season, where his season was good, I'd imagine White and Gabriel are the main two, but who knows? It's not as secure as Gabriel. And then on Zinchenko, I think it's an interesting one because, again, you've got Tierney to come back. I was going to say Paul Tierney, then I realised he's a referee, Kieran Tierney, to come back. And he can therefore play at left back, and Zinchenko potentially plays in midfield, I guess. And that's not just speculation because Zinchenko is similar. Like Alaba has always played centre midfield, hasn't he, for Austria, and then plays as a full back. And it's a similar thing with Zinchenko. For those who don't know, at Ukraine, he plays in centre midfield, and that is certainly is possible. So there's some quotes here I wrote down from Arteta. In pre-season, he said he can play in both defence and midfields. He was a natural number 10 early in his career, and we converted him into a left back. He's talking about when he was at Man City, which can do a lot of things that we want in our way of planning. And then he says this, that versatility is something that's going to be important for the team because we have players in that position who are more specific fullbacks. So he's talking there about, I guess he's talking there about Tierney, who can play left back, who's a more specific left back, which means you see Zinchenko in midfield at some point. You've then got to work out, does that make him more of a goal threat if he's still playing as a defensive midfielder anyway, or is he more of a threat at left back, which I think is interesting. But because of that reason, that makes his expected minutes xMins higher than Zinchenko. I'll skip over Xhaka and Partey. Don't think there's anything we need to discuss. With regards to those two. It's quite interesting actually when I went through the expected goal involvement from last season for the front four. You've actually got firstly Jesus first from his expected goal involvement at Man City was 0.71.
Yeah, crazy high.
Yeah, really high, and that probably reduces slightly because of the quality around him, but his minutes go up. So there's a reason why he's the most popular pick in the game, I think. And I think that another thing that's interesting is you've got Nketiah there, who's actually had the second highest expected goal involvement per 90 in the team. But you've got to take that in the context of him probably playing against weaker opposition because of him rotating in and often as well coming on at the end of games when players are more tired. Maybe that has an impact on that as well. But he's clearly a talented player.
Yeah, he was just flat out good for the back end of the season for Arsenal when he came in.
Yeah, he was brilliant, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we see him eventually get starts, for sure. And then an interesting thing with the other three is you've actually got Saka and Martinelli at a really similar expected goal involvement last year. Saka was the better asset for sure. Just if you look at them, irrespective of price, Saka had an amazing FPL season. And Saka's expected minutes are definitely higher, but for the beginning of the season, like someone in the chat there has just said, Smith Rowe's dealing with a slight knock apparently, so that makes Martinelli's chances of starting really high. And we know anyway from last season, there was a period where Smith Rowe would come off the bench and score, and Martinelli just always started the next game. So I think we can be quite certain that he's first choice. So I think that's interesting. Erdegaard, like I don't particularly like him as a pick, Luke. I don't know if you have a particular opinion on that. It just doesn't. It's his lack of like shots. Well, his lack of XG. I think he does shoot a fair amount from outside the box, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's hard to justify him when you've got Martinelli there, I think.
No, he's a nice player, and it's a decent price. So I'll never say never, but his numbers just don't bowl me over. I mean, they're not bad. It's 0.38 per 90, which is decent. You know, it's not bad at all. It's just about relative to the other options again, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't totally hate it. I just think that Saka and Martinelli are better options. Like I say, lovely player and always open to the chance it can change. We've had players in this sort of position similar in the past, like Tadic and even Eriksen at certain stages of his career, where they've kind of, or even David Silva, like these people have been the assister of the assister. They get that kind of tag. I think he's kind of a little bit in that vein, but the numbers, like I say, the price and the numbers are actually okay. So I am open to it. I just prefer other options.
Yeah.
The thing that strikes me there about the team more than anything is, especially if Saliba starts centre half, which I think he will, and Ben White goes to right back at the beginning of the season. Obviously, that could stay that way. It's just that how comfortable nearly everyone is on the ball in that team now. I think he's worked it really well. You know, Zinchenko, we know he's incredibly comfortable. Gabriel's always been comfortable on the ball. We know Ben White, that's part of his thing. Saliba is apparently, I can't say I've seen him myself, but apparently very good on the ball. Xhaka is, he's a playmaker. He is decent on the ball. Partey's decent on the ball. Odegaard, obviously. Saka looks after it. Maybe say Martinelli, he's probably the outlier there, but that's not really his game. And I'd say Jesus, being at Man City, compared to most other forwards, though, he's not terrible on the ball either. He'd certainly be better than most, the other striker options they would have on the ball. So I think, people call him sort of Man City light with Arteta there. I think he's getting closer and closer to that. I think that I think they're going to be really good, to be honest. I just can't see how that team is. It looks really good. The weak areas to me are clearly just the Xhaka and Partey. If they lose one of those, it starts to be a bit of a worry. But then you just mentioned maybe Zinchenko comes in. If Tierney's fit at left back, you could argue that's not a dramatic loss. In fact, you could argue that might even be better. So, it's looking good, isn't it? Well, then obviously they've got the backup in the likes of Pepe, Vieira, and Smith Rowe and Nketiah all across the front positions there. I know they're in Europe as well. But that's going to be needed as a result. So I think it's looking really good for them.
Yeah, and that was another player I wrote down, Pepe. Like his expected goal involvement is really high, but he just plays, either in Europe or like League Cup games, or comes off the bench.
Quality of opposition is a part there, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. He played 700 minutes last season. That's it in the league. So I don't think anyone's considering him anyway. So I'm not doing anyone a favour by telling them not to. But I just don't worry about him as a threat. And then one thing I'll just mention that I mentioned last week but didn't have the details for is like the penalty situation, because penalties are so important for FPL assets in general, because the team can have an awful match but they win a penalty and then you've got to return basically. And I think there's a lot of I think the fact that Martinelli is probably on penalties is like massively under the radar. So I looked at the actual details of those 3 penalties in the second half of last season. Which is basically after the 3 penalties after Aubameyang left, I believe, or when he wasn't on the pitch to take them. So the first one, Saka took, but Martinelli wasn't on the pitch for it. The second one, Saka took, but Martinelli came on in the 92nd minute, and then Arteta specifically said in his press conference that he thought Gabriel was going to take it. And then we saw on the last day of the season at 0-0 in the first half with both players on the pitch in the most important game of the season, if Norwich had happened to get an upset against Spurs, that Martinelli took it. So I think Martinelli's on penalties. That would be my guess. Yeah. And we know Jesus' record isn't great with penalties as well, I believe.
No. For me,
so I think that's I think that's like really under the radar. Sorry, mate, I interrupted you there.
No, it was me. I often do that. Sorry. It's I'm with you. I think Martinelli, with the information we've got right now, we have to assume Martinelli's on it. I just think Jesus, big signing, Man City, the big I am, there's a chance that he just says, look, I'm on it, and I don't know. I mean, does this even matter? Is this narrative they're both from Brazil? He's the more senior. Do you know what I mean? Is it one of those, let me have it, mate? At the end of the day, the manager's going to decide, right? I think. So, it's a bit of speculation there. I don't think Saka's penalties were particularly good when he took them, my lad. I know there's probably a little bit of a hangover there from the World Cup as well, right? Because he missed. But Yeah, I don't know. That's a detail we will find out, but I would bet that Martinelli's probably on them. There's also the factor that I bet you the first time they get a penalty, Martinelli's been subbed, and then we don't get the answer. That's usually what happens in these situations, right? And someone else takes them. Yeah, should we move on?
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
Okay, let's go. Hello, Rubber Ducky, quack quack. That's going to sound really weird on the pod, isn't it? He is in the chat if you lot are confused.
Right, walked into your room.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on to Spurs. I'll try to be quick because we're going on quite a bit. But on the screen, we've got Hugo Lloris in goal. We've got Romero, Dyer, and Lenglet at the back. We've got Bissouma and Højbjerg in the centre midfield. Doherty and Perisic as wing backs. And then Kulusevski, Kane, and Son as the front three. Spurs are quite tricky, I think, certainly in the wing-back area, we know that. I think that back three in general is fairly secure. I would say that Lenglet, I don't know how to say it properly, Lenglet, he was at Barcelona, French international.
Longley.
Sorry, Longley, okay. He's not 100%, I would say. I think he's a left-sided centre-back. I think he has been brought in to challenge for that position and probably make it his own. I think Ben Davies may start the season there, but he's also had quite limited minutes. In fact, Davinson Sanchez has had the most minutes out of all the options there. He's not really a left-sided centre-back. He plays on the right. I wouldn't be surprised if Davinson Sanchez actually starts there, and then because of that, and then they move to this. But I don't think really any of those are particular options. I do think Romero and Dyer, you could look at them because they're secure, and Spurs' defence is good, and it's a fairly cheap price. It's just the temptation is always to spend that little bit more for a wing-back. Before I move on to them though, Højbjerg I think is pretty secure. I do think Bissouma will eventually take that spot. Whether he'll start there is debatable just because, again, the minutes thing, new to the club. I think Bentancur has got a good chance of actually starting. Bissouma will eventually come in. The wing-back situation, which is what everyone wants to know, I think it's the most appealing position really outside of the obvious names. There's so many options at right-back. I think given Emerson Royale, we've obviously got Doherty, who is there at the moment. Lucas Moura has been talked up as an option. And they've signed Jed Spence as well. So that's at least 4 players I can think of that could possibly play there. For me, it makes sense to play Doherty. I think it's a bit of a leap. But he's played well when he started for them, when Conte's been there anyway. He's not the best defensively. But I think if you look at this system, and that Perisic, I think, has been signed to be the left wing back. I don't think there's any debate there. I think it's more about the fact that his age and obviously the fact he's just joined with the only things that will kind of hold him back from being the main starter in that position. If he's going to be, he is predominantly right-footed, so if he cuts back in on his right foot, Doherty drifts in, Kulusevski, we know, more hugs the line, is more of a creative player, so it makes sense for Doherty to float into that space. Obviously Kane will come very deep from that graphic. He's almost playing as a 6, 8, 10, anywhere between there really, most of the time. So that makes sense, I think, for Doherty to start there. Whether he ends up staying there will depend a lot on his performance, and there's lots of options. So it is very much a punt on the expected minutes there for Doherty, but I do kind of like it to start the season. I think there are other options you could move to. I think you could start with Southampton game with him, hope he plays. You could do very well, and if it's an issue, maybe sort it. It's not ideal, but I think the upside is there where you could consider it. Similar to Perisic, I think that they've got one more pre-season game left, I think, so there's a good chance he starts that. I think there's a good chance he might come back into the template. Quite a lot of he does start that for the reason.
For sure.
Yeah, I just think he's a really, really good option. And again, I'm just going to switch to review here quickly, if I can manage to work this out. Let's go to review. And hopefully you guys can see this. It's quite small. See if I can make that bigger. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's switch to defenders. Okay, so if I saw the top 50 defenders review again for the first 6 game weeks, and we sort by the total points, okay, we can see hopefully on your screen there, we've got the obvious names at the top: Trent, Robertson, James, Van Dijk, Cancelo. Perisic is right up there. He's literally, where is he? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th. So he's in 10th position. But the interesting part is the expected minutes column. Now he's on 59 expected minutes, whereas everyone above him is in 70s, high 70s, 80s. His points per million, very high, 0.64. The punt is, this isn't groundbreaking, is it? But it's fairly obvious. If you were to adjust those minutes, if you think that you can get above, the hive mind, if you're a better predictor of the minutes, or I expect these will actually go up if he plays in the last game. the moment you start adjusting that, he starts to jump up this list very, very rapidly. So people are often in FPL, I think, happy to punt on a player that doesn't have the best stats. It's like, okay, I've got a feeling about this player, I'll bring this player in. You know, either they do well, people laud it, and rightly so. You know, it's part of what the game's about. You know, it's about fun. You bring in a player and he does it, smash it, well done, Maverick pick, you did brilliantly. But I think sometimes people ignore players where it's more a punt on the minutes. We all know if Perisic actually plays, he is fantastic. So if you're able to judge that and catch that, I still really, really do like him as an option. And there's been numerous examples of this in the past. You've got like Gareth Bale, for example. You've got Aguero even. You could argue maybe Haaland will start to go down that route. There's players where if you're... Mahrez, he does go both ways. Mahrez, you can do this and he's just a tragic. That's happened as well. I'm not going to pretend that it's always going to work. But I do really like it. I think it's a really good position there in the team. I just think the whole system is structured really well. I think if we go back to it, Son generally he starts on the left-hand side, but he will drift into those central areas, and it gives Perisic that option to just cut in a lot of the time. So I'm just a massive fan, and my inkling is always to go for these kind of players and hope that I can spike early on with one of them. So you have to try and talk me out of it, I think, Sam, because he's probably not going to be optimal just based on the fact that his minutes are probably too low.
It'd be interesting to see by Game Week 1 whether it's you that's talked me into it or me that's talked you out of it. Because for those listening, me and Luke are probably similar players in terms of the fact we're data driven and the resources we use to make decisions, but often very different in our conclusions and in terms of risk taking. I'm a bit of a wimp, and so I think that'll be interesting. And I think you've touched on the right players there. They're the interesting ones. You've touched on in terms of minutes, like Son and Kane. We don't really need to talk about. We know they're brilliant assets within the game.
No.
You know, whether you can get them in your team or not because of other big assets, that's another thing. But we know their expected minutes are high. And yeah, Kulusevski is a really interesting one, isn't he? Because he was so good last season when he started, when he came into the team, and even if you look at his performance on the last day of the season, it was so good. So you can see why he's got the price hike. But I wonder if I wonder if they've just increased it that little bit too high because of some of the other players around that same price, maybe.
Yeah.
And the minutes thing as well with Richarlison and like you said, Moore as well, maybe having minutes, but. We'll see. I don't think I'd put anyone off it. It's by no means a bad pick, Kulusevski either.
I think it is a bad pick. I think it's a bad pick. Ducky's in the chat and he loves him, and I've seen him saying that. I don't know. He could be a very good pick. At the end of the day, he looks like he's a very good player. I just think his historical numbers aren't the best. I think he overperforms in terms of his returns. I don't think it's sustainable to return at that level. And the price is, compared to some of the other ones, I don't particularly like it. That doesn't mean I don't like him as an option for the first few games because they're fantastic fixtures. I think when you add on Richarlison is there, I do think, Richarlison generally plays on the left or up front. I think that's just a Europe thing. Son's going to come off as he always does, which I shouldn't put people off in the last 10-15 minutes, and they'll probably go to Richarlison. Obviously, they need to give Kane a break, they will do, but I think, again, that's more just of Europe and stuff. So it's debatable whether Richarlison would actually affect Kulusevski that much, but I do feel like there's a chance there at least that he could do. I don't know. I think he's okay. I think he's a fine pick. I just don't think he's the best pick personally.
Sure. The only thing I'd say on that is even though he massively outperformed his underlying data by almost double, he outperformed. The underlying data was still pretty high.
Yeah, it was still decent.
0.5 expected goal involvements per game, or per 90, is still really high, even though he massively outperformed that. So they priced him just based on the outcome of the goals and assists, he'd be even more. I just think they've slightly overpriced him. But I understand your reluctancy because of minutes. But I guess I'd be less worried about Moura, I think, and more confident in them just using Richarlison as a substitute, particularly initially. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And Conte's a factor here. I appreciate he has made some players with not the best stats in the past perform. I'm just more a person that generally believes that they'll regress to the mean overall, and I think that's probably what's going to happen. Having said that, like I said right at the start, the games are very good. He looks like he's going to be starting the season. I don't have any issue with anyone picking him to begin with. I'm talking long term. I don't think he's the best option at that price bracket. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I don't really want to discuss Son and Kane. I love Son as a pick, and we've been through it a little bit. I think at that price, he becomes difficult, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Really, that's we've gone through this before, haven't we? It's very hard to make a team with Salah, Son, Haaland. Like I understand why he's in people's teams, but I just think, look, I'm going to say this, right? So Son's overperformance, we know that he does that. We know that some players have got this historically. We know players like Messi have done this in the past, so we know it is a thing that can happen and continue. In my mind, I'm always of the opinion that eventually that won't carry on. Am I right in thinking that? I genuinely don't know. I think that when you put his price up, and the chances, is there a chance he gets better than he is in terms of his overperformance? His numbers could go up in general, fine, I accept that. But surely, if anything, it's more likely to regress than it is to carry on. Or am I just way off there? Because he's always overperformed, so we can take that as the standard and it won't drop. I genuinely don't know. Like
I would think you've got to compare it relative to how much he normally overperforms. So it's not true that he'll, like, every player will, although it will generally happen for all players, it's not true that every single player will eventually regress to like their XG, because some players are just world-class finishers, and Son is one of the best finishers in world football. But I would still say that last season, particularly the last like 10 games, he outperformed that XG to an extent that was unsustainable. Like, it was insane, to be honest. So he'll probably still outscore his XG, like he always does. It just won't be to that same ridiculous extent that it was for 10 games. So yeah, it's not true that all players will eventually regress to that mean, in terms, because some players are better finishers, and Son's definitely one of those players. But yeah, the extent to which he did that, so we'll see it regress relative to the end of last season, I would expect.
Yeah, and again, that's not. I love Son, and I think you couldn't ask for a better game, really. Southampton, especially, we know that they can play a high line. So if they continue along that vein, Tottenham are one of the teams that you would say are primed to take advantage of that situation. And he is. People are saying in the chat there, he is basically the striker in the system. Absolutely, he's the striker in the system. Really, he is without a doubt, and he's a very good option. It's just comparative when you look at the other players, like for example Salah. Basically, we want to go Haaland. I think it becomes very hard to fit him in.
And it becomes hard because of fixtures as well, doesn't it? As well, like City and Liverpool's fixtures are better than Spurs. So I think if you switch them, say Spurs had Arsenal fixtures, suddenly it'd be really, really interesting. I think comparing Son to like Salah, if Liverpool had like the second worst fixtures in the league and had like Chelsea first game, Man City fourth game, for example, I think then it becomes interesting. But because it's comparing him to Salah, De Bruyne, Haaland, wherever you're going, but also on top of that, you've got the ability of the player, but also the better fixtures. I think that's when it becomes really tricky. But in general, even if they were the same price, I prefer Kane. I know how good Son was last season, but I just plays slightly more minutes, and I like the fact that Kane's on penalties.
Yeah, I mean, you love your penalties, don't you? But I'm fully aware that there might be some bias in my thinking because he's not in my team. So we start to make reasons and justifications as to why he's not in your team, right? It's not like that for me. Sure. I appreciate that is there. I love Son. I think he's a very, very good option. It's just you can't have them all is basically the expression. So I'm resigned myself to looking at his points once again from afar and being upset nearly every single time he scores. But it is what it is. I think that's that done to death, really, for Spurs. Should we move on? We've got Chelsea and Liverpool left to go. Liverpool, go on.
Just put anyone at ease. We're not going through all 20 teams in the Premier League. We're not going to be here until tomorrow morning. No. I can't remember if we mentioned at the beginning, but we're going through the top 6 teams. They are the top 6 teams. That's where they finished last season. So people can laugh about Man United, but ultimately they did finish 6th.
Yeah, so suck on that, Man United haters. Let's go through Liverpool then, mate. These two teams are yours, so I'm going to kick back now and just relax and listen to you. I think at least in Liverpool's case, it's a little bit easier, isn't it? Probably a few spots up for debate.
Yeah, I think there's just a few spots up for debate here, and it was very easy to put together like their best, or like again generally their best 11. And I live in Liverpool, so I could chat to a few people about this one who watch them more regularly than I do. Don't need to discuss Alisson. I don't think I need to discuss Trent either. We know that he's like how ridiculous he is in terms of his goal involvement, let alone the fact he gets clean sheets on top of that, and the fact he's only 8, is he? Just own him. Robertson, we know is going to be playing regularly at left back. Now, there's a couple of Liverpool fans I spoke to that think that this season Tsimikas will probably get more minutes, and that's just because ultimately he's getting older and becoming a better player. and maybe over time, just Klopp starts to trust him a bit more. But I don't think that's something at all to be worrying about at the beginning of the season if you're going there. But maybe that'd be more of a factor towards the back end of the season than it was this season, where we maybe saw him dropped or saw him play Simicast maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times over Robertson. Like maybe that will be slightly more. Van Dijk, I think, is just as nailed as players come in the team. And the reason for that is he's probably the best centre back in the world. And it's interesting, who will play with them? I think like Matip, in my opinion, is pretty nailed, but they do have a few other players who can play there. And Konaté's an interesting one because last season we saw Konaté play in
the cups.
I think like all the cups, but not in the finals is the interesting thing. So as soon as they got to the finals, so within the Champions League final and also the which ones was it? Was it the League Cup or the FA Cup final? One of those as well. He then suddenly dropped in for Matip. So I think that's interesting as well. That he's definitely he trusts Konaté, but he didn't play in the League Cup final or the Champions League final, although he got them there.
Yeah, I think there's a chance they switch, but from what we know at the moment, you have to put Matip there. I think, right?
Yeah, he definitely. I think that's definitely first choice. But Konaté's a very good player. But Matip's such a funny one because I know a lot of the models actually really like him, and particularly relative to his value. But he's always a tricky one to justify because it's pretty likely that you'll have a like 2 Liverpool midfielders and a defender, or you'll have Robertson and Trent. So yeah, I think Matip is preferred not only in the league but also in those big cup finals, which gives you even more confidence in him. So he's nailed. It's just having him relative to the other players you'll have in your team from Liverpool and what that takes away from it, basically. So that's all I'd say there as well. And then in terms of midfield, I don't think any of them are FPL options. They're the 3 I put there that are maybe likely to play on Saturday, I think. Fabinho, Thiago, and Jordan Henderson. I don't think there's anything to touch on there. We know that Salah is nailed on the right wing. I don't think there's anything to indicate he's going to play centrally again, like we've seen in some previous seasons. Just because there's no one else that is regularly going to play on his level on the right wing at all. Now Diaz, I think, is really, really interesting. So if you look at the expected goal involvement from last season, Diaz is 0.59 per 90, and actually he was only in the league. He was only benched 5 times, and that's 5 times while Mane was at the club. So I think that's interesting, and I think he's pretty nailed going into the beginning of the season for that reason. The fact he started a lot of games last season, Diaz, since he joined, and did well in them, and that was while Mane was still there. So I think that Diaz was probably bought in January as the Mane replacement on that left wing, and therefore Jota is the one who's more likely to play centrally, him and Darwin Núñez basically. And then based on Liverpool fans that I've talked to, they seem to think the same thing. Yeah, that Diaz was bought to be the main left winger over Jota, for example, and Jota will just occupy that central role. And that's where it becomes really interesting because Jota, again, like last season, how many goals did he score? 15, I think.
Yeah, Jota's amazing when he's on the pitch. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So his expected goal involvement is not far off Salah's per 90. They're both Salah's 0.89 last season, Jota's 0.82. The key thing is minutes, and I think when he's fit, it's going to be really interesting. It's just something I can't call, but it's really interesting to see whether it's him or Núñez that plays there. I guess it'll depend on Núñez's opening games, how well he does. I just don't know the answer to that. I don't want to just
No, I think Firmino might even start the season. To be honest, I think one of those two. I do think that Jota's, just because they've signed Núñez, is more likely to feature on the left because they don't. I mean, Carvalho could play there, but I think he's still quite young and raw.
So I think we might see Jota come on the left. I just think Diaz is definitely first choice on the left. That's all I'd say. Because Jota's more.
Oh, I don't disagree.
Flexible,
and Jota's. The update today was that he's still quite a way off with his injury as well. So it's just not anything we need to worry about. And as a result, I'd argue that's probably more of a negative for people who believed in Diaz, if you know what I mean. It's almost like now there's no reason not to go there, whereas before there might have been. So it might put some people off. But I really like him.
I'd love to see Bobby Firmino play more as well because he's such a great player. And we just hardly saw him play last season. He only played 990 minutes in the league last season, which is such a drop off from him being such a core member of that team. And I think a lot of that was just down to how exceptional Jota was for that first part of the season, I guess.
Yeah,
And then
partly injury as well. He started to get more injury prone for me now, it seems. That's it. You're right. I mean, the Matip situation, I think he's probably nailed, but it's debatable. Maybe he could switch that round at some point. People thought that Konate might come in originally. Didn't happen. So yeah, he could switch it round. Konate League, Matip Cups, but I think Matip's probably ahead at this point. Naby Keita could come in midfield, but he's not fantasy relevant particularly.
Yeah.
And then, that front three, I think Firmino, Nunes is debatable to start the season, but the other two look pretty nailed on. So there's not too much to discuss there, is it? We know the way Liverpool play. Everyone knows that. They've watched him for a number of years. Doesn't look like it's going to change. You could debate that if Nunes is going to be more nailed and play more games, then the loss of Mane, the adjustment to him, not playing Firmino might be a factor. I just can't see it being enough of a factor yet to worry about it at all. It's something that maybe after 8, 9, 10 games, if he's played all of them and the numbers are totally different to what they were, then maybe we start to worry. But I can't see that yet, so it's not something I'll concern myself with.
Yeah, the last thing I'd say is ultimately they've lost one attacker and they've signed 3 since January. Sorry, 2 since January. So they've got an increase in the number of attackers in the team. So I wonder if in previous seasons, and not last season, but we've actually seen them play a 4-2-3-1, which means you can play 4 attackers within the same system. And 2 seasons ago, that was Firmino actually playing behind Salah, behind the striker, whoever it was at the time. I think it might have been even Salah playing centrally. I can't remember. That allowed them to play Jota and Mane, from what I remember. And I think, maybe we'll see that later in the season. Who knows? Just speculation, because there's a lot of options in that area.
Yeah, could be. Absolutely.
Should we move on to Chelsea?
Let's do it. So they're arguably harder than City most of the time, but maybe it's a little bit clearer this season. Maybe.
Tuchel Tombola. Okay, I found this one quite tricky. I spoke to a guy who Luke recommended I chat through Twitter called he's called Fanta Mantle on Twitter. Gary, big Chelsea fan and good at predicting their teams. So he was really helpful. So I wanted to give him a quick shout out. Again, from back to front. Sorry for those listening: Mendy, Koulibaly, Thiago Silva, Chalobah. At right wing back, James and Chilwell, Kovacic and Kante in the middle, Mount, Havertz and Sterling up front. And again, this is a team in general that we probably think is at the moment their strongest starting 11. In terms of what's interesting, that one thing initially is Thiago Silva because of his age and his ability to play multiple minutes. I think Chalobah actually had a really good season considering he was like his first consistent exposure to first team as well last season. And despite the signing of Koulibaly, because they've lost Rudiger and Christensen, I think we'll see them sign another defender. I just think they have to.
They're certainly trying.
Yeah, because they've tried to get Koundé, haven't they? From what I've read, it seems like he's maybe going to go to Barca now. I'm not sure if that's gone through. But they're definitely after other centre-backs. It just feels to me like an absolute necessity as well. There's also Sarr, who can play at centre-back.
Yeah.
But it feels to me if like an injury-prone Thiago Silva gets injured, suddenly it's not optimal. Azpilicueta's still there as well, who can potentially fill in. You might get James at right centre-back as well. At some times, but I don't think that's going to happen regularly based on what we've seen in pre-season as well.
I don't know. I think...
Really? Are you worried about that?
I am. I'd be lying if I wasn't. I just don't think Chubala... He's not completely trusted. He had some very good games when he first came in, and then he kind of fell out of favour. And then you've got Azpilicueta apparently wants to leave, who obviously would be the person who we saw last season occasionally wouldn't, well, obviously play the centre-back role, but sometimes play the right wing-back role to put James in the centre-half because he didn't even fully trust him there, I don't think. So it's dicey. I do really think they need someone in. I'd still might be willing to he's currently in my team still, James, to risk him. I say risk. But it's a worry. I would love to see them sign a centre-back just to secure my feelings there that he won't end up playing that centre-back role. The other option is if Azpilicueta does want to leave, who's he going to end up playing right wing-back? There are players in the team he could play them. I don't think any of them are a great fit either, so it's tricky.
So from an FPL point of view, like the best thing is they sign a centre-back or two, and Azpilicueta leaves because there's no potential rotation at right wing-back and no threat to James. So that's like the ideal, I guess. I think they will. It's based the fact that I think James, I'm probably more confident than most that he plays most of his games at right wing back is because I just think they will sign a centre back, maybe even two. I was talking to another Chelsea fan yesterday who was saying they need two really, like not even. They don't. It's not even that they just need one. They need to get two in Sorry, someone's just said in the chat there, Nick, that Koundé has actually signed for Barca now. That's official.
Is it?
As
Okay.
well.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
blow then. Well,
Yeah.
they got him for Fofana today as well, apparently. I think that would be a great fit. I think he's a very good player. So that for example, would really help ease my fears. But you already touched on it. If Silva gets injured, which can happen, and Koulibaly could get injured, anyone could get injured, they're suddenly quite light, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
This is why I think they've talked about the back four, which he has tried in pre-season as well, and that just didn't work against Arsenal.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he won't carry on and try, but at the end of the day, if you start running out of centre-backs, he might be forced into it.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the only other thing I was going to mention regarding the formation was, the fact they tried that against Arsenal. Seemingly, I've only seen the scoreline. I've not watched the highlights, but it's seemingly an absolute disaster based on what I've read about the match as well. In terms of the midfield too, again, not FPL relevant, but some people would probably put Gallagher in there instead of Kante based on just some pre-season minutes. Maybe for some games he'll play there. But the thing I would say about that is Gallagher in pre-season has been playing very deep. So if you're thinking that Gallagher might eventually become an option, it seems likely that if he does play, it will actually be as one of those two. And so the Gallagher that would be playing at Chelsea would be completely different to the Gallagher at Crystal Palace. He was playing really advanced, almost like as a number 10, basically, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was at times. I think Gallagher will end up getting decent minutes simply because everyone else in their centre midfield seems to be so injury prone. I don't think he'll start off at first choice because the manager said he kind of has to learn the role. I think how can you? Kovacic is pretty much nailed, isn't he? He's just like he's their best
player.
He's the best player there, and Kante, he's obviously world class when he's bang at it. It's just the injuries and stuff. So I would have thought that's the primary two. Yeah.
I think we're just about beyond, we've gone beyond, Kante being absolutely ridiculous now, haven't we? He's still a very, very good footballer when he's, fit and playing regularly. But he's not quite at the same, outrageous level.
Happens to us all, Sam. Have you not seen me? His hairs, man, they're going grey and everything. Can't run anymore.
I'm still in my prime, mate.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
I would say as well in terms of the front three, Mount is, to me, seems absolutely nailed. Sterling, I think, has been brought in. One of the reasons he wanted to leave City is that he wasn't playing regularly, I would assume. And Havertz is the interesting one. And what I would just say on those ones, if you look at Havertz, Mount, and Werner, for example, their expected goal involvement is all identical per 90. They're all about 0.55 per 90. But Mount's minutes are going to be so much higher than Havertz and Werner you'd expect. So I just think if you're going with a pick there, Mount's the one to go with. And he's, obviously, he's a midfielder in the game as well, where Havertz isn't. So I wouldn't consider Havertz for that reason, just because you've got Mount as an alternative. But I think, is Havertz 7 and Mount 8, or is Havertz even more than that?
I think Havertz is 8. I think he is.
Is he 8? Yeah, I think he's just not an option when you've got Mount.
Let me check that. I'm pretty sure he is. That shows you how little I've looked at him as an option, but I think he is 8.
And Sterling I wouldn't start the season with, but that's purely from I'm talking from my team point of view. In terms of budget, I can't fit him in because I'm going with Salah and Haaland or Kane. And I want the certain strong defenders I want. But again, I wouldn't put anyone off starting with Sterling. Independently as an asset, I think he's going to be brilliant. If I had to call it now, I think if anyone had to call it now, you'd guess that Sterling will be their top scorer at the end of the season.
Probably, yeah.
Probably, yeah. He's just an outstanding footballer. He scored in previous seasons 20 goals in a season, back to back. And I think he scored 19 and 20 or 20 and 21 for City one season in the Premier League. And that's with reduced minutes. He's absolutely a world-class player. And he's not just a goal scorer as well. We saw that assist he got, that basically won them the league for that first Gundogan goal on the last day. It's not rare he does that and gets him behind to the byline and cuts it back if he ends up playing on the wing. So I don't think there's anything else I need to add about them. But I think they're just definitely there's some uncertainties there, and there'll be a lot more rotation than compared to the sum of the teams. In fact, if you actually split it by expected goal involvement per 90, the two top players are Kennedy and Ross Barkley, who presumably played about 45 minutes, but happened to get an assist or create a chance.
Yeah. I do think there's a little bit more clarity in terms of. I say this, we just said Tuchel, Tombola. I think it's a little bit easier to begin the season. I'd be fairly confident that outside the non-fantasy relevant picks, I think the Mount, Sterling, Havertz front three, and James and Chilwell, whether James will play wing back is debatable, but I think those are fairly nailed. On Alonso, he has played quite a lot of pre-season minutes, and Chilwell probably hasn't played as much as people would have thought that he would. Obviously, he did have that big injury, so that is a slight concern for people. So that is a worry. I do think Chilwell might be one where we just have to wait and see a little bit. I don't know. I think that probably is the safe play. My inkling is that Chilwell just comes in and plays and is great, but it feels like a little bit too much of a punt given what we've seen in pre-season so far. But yeah, the Sterling thing I just wanted to touch on. Interestingly, on review, which I've got up on the screen, again, this is for the first 6 weeks. This is the free version. It's very, very big on Mount. It's got him highest for, between the Chelsea option, it's got him highest for total points. And obviously as Sterling is 10 million, he's obviously points per million is higher as well. I just find that very interesting because I would have expected Sterling to trump him given these 2 million more and his record. I think the main reason that Sterling's actually quite low on the minutes at the moment for expecting 72 minutes, whereas Mount's 79. I wouldn't be surprised if Sterling's minutes were, like you say, pretty high. I think that's the inkling I get, is that Mount and Sterling will be a lot more nailed in those positions, and that might benefit Chelsea in the main. I know there's a lot of negativity around Chelsea at the moment, just generally because of their performance, the manager throwing them under the bus a little bit, lots of players wanting to leave, all of these factors. But I think at least in those two spots, it looks a little bit more secure than it has previously, because I would say outside Mount, you never quite knew who was going to start, even in that centre-forward position. I think right now Werner wants to leave as well, apparently. So Batshuayi is the backup, I've been told, for Havertz. I mean, that doesn't sound fantastic. So therefore, if anything, that helps to nail his minutes a little bit more as well, right? So I think where they've lost in some areas, I'd expect the minutes for Mount, Sterling and Havertz to be reasonably secure. So that's at least one positive.
Great. Should we call it there, Luke?
Absolutely, yeah. We've gone on, haven't we? So we tried our best to cover all the teams, guys. Is there any questions? I see you've put that in the chat there to see if anyone can do it. There's a bit of a delay though, so maybe we can answer them afterwards if you want to.
Here we go. We've got one through here. Triple City, too risky for game week 1. Cancelo, Haaland and Grealish. To answer that quickly from my point of view, no.
No, I don't think it's risky either. Absolutely not. I think that's fine for game week 1. Beyond that, Grealish there's a slight question mark. The other two I wouldn't question.
And again, try and view them independently as picks rather than 3 picks from the same team, whether that's risky. And we've finished just in time for 9:30. So if any of you are listening now and don't know, FPL Black Box is about to go live as well at 9:30. So do go over and join those guys. Also, if you head over to our Twitter tomorrow, I'll share our league code. Also, so that you can try and win our mini league that we put on, and then also hopefully from next week. Hopefully the full massive data model will be out for FPL review, so we can focus on that as well. And we'll be it'll be live on YouTube at 8 again on Thursday, but it will be a premiere then. So we're having to pre-record next week as well. And please go over and follow us on Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube or on the podcast app you're using as well. And thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. It's been crazy the amount of listens and stuff we've had on YouTube and on the podcast. So really appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely, just have to echo that. Thanks a lot, guys. I can see there's been some extra questions there. I'll just try to answer those in the chat, so we can close this off, and then I'll speak to you in the chat if you hang around for a little bit. Thanks for joining.